What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 4G and the Motorola Moto G Pure. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Moto G Pure, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio as well. Now, on one hand, for what it is, the Moto G Pure really doesn't have a bad display, and for a more light user, if you're doing more basic activities like browsing the web, using social media, and maybe watching the occasional video every now and then, but you're not really going to be on your phone a lot, for that kind of use, the Moto G Pure will at least get the job done. But definitely between the two, the display we're getting with the Samsung Galaxy A14 is quite a bit better. At 6.6 inches versus 6.5, it is a tiny bit larger, and while the difference isn't really huge, it is still there, and when you're actually using the phone, it will make at least a bit of a difference. And of course, with a 1080p resolution versus only 720p with the Moto G Pure, the A14 of course has a much sharper image. So if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where the image quality is a bit more important, this is going to give you a much better experience. And despite neither phone having any particularly special display technology like an AMOLED, for example, I would say the display with the A14 is a bit brighter, and the viewing angles are also better too. So if you're in a brighter area, like outside in the sun for example, the A14 will be a bit easier to see. So in general, if you tend to be on your phone a bit more, and the display is important to you, then the A14 will be a much better choice. Now for storage, there's definitely a huge difference here. With the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 128GB of internal storage, and with the Moto G Pure, we're only getting 32. And both phones do support microSD card expansion too. Now, one thing I do want to point out here is that as of the recording of this video, the Samsung Galaxy A14 hasn't quite made it to US carriers yet, and while I do think it will in the near future, when it does, I seriously doubt this phone is actually going to have this much storage. So just keep in mind, while it's not impossible, I would definitely not expect a version of this phone you get from a US carrier to have an entire 128GB. So with this phone, if you do want this much storage, you will have to get the unlocked international version. That being said though, at this point in 2023, I'm definitely expecting it to have at least 64, because at this point, 32GB is really not that much. And for most people, no matter what you're doing on your phone, 32GB will fill up pretty quickly. So unless you're really doing the bare minimum, and you're not really downloading that many apps or anything like that, I would probably avoid any phone that has only 32GB, because again, at this point in 2023, it's really just not enough. But again, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, although this version of the phone in my hand does have 128GB, when this phone does eventually make it to US carriers, I don't think it's going to be the same, but again, I'm sure it will at least have 64. For security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners too. With the Samsung Galaxy A14, it's on the power key, and with the Moto G Pure, it's right here on the back. But starting with the A14, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Pure. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. No issues at all. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, up front, we got a 13MP selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50MP main camera, a 5MP ultra-wide camera, and a 2MP macro camera. With the Moto G Pure, up front, we got a 5MP selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a dual camera with a 13MP main camera and a 2MP depth sensing camera. So in pretty much every way, the Samsung Galaxy A14 has a much better camera here. First of all, when it comes to features, with the Moto G Pure, we're not getting an ultra-wide camera or a macro camera, whereas with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're actually getting both here. And interesting to note, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, that phone doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, whereas somehow the A14 4G does, so kinda interesting, but definitely glad to see an ultra-wide camera on a more entry-level phone like this. But in addition to the features, I would say overall the photo quality with the A14 is a bit better too. That being said though, keep in mind, these are really entry-level phones you can get for under $200, so you can really only expect so much. But at the same time, again, definitely between the two, the photo quality with the Samsung Galaxy A14 is significantly better. To give you an idea of what they can do, first, here are some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A14. So overall, again, definitely not super crazy high quality photos or anything, but at the same time, considering again this is more of a lower end device, I would say for the average casual user, it most likely will get the job done just fine. And then here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Pure, and I will say for what it is, the photo quality here is really not bad. But again, compared to the A14, I feel like the A14 is just a little better. So in general, if you're still more of a casual user, but maybe the camera is a bit more important to you, I would go for the A14. But for a really light occasional user, maybe you really don't care about the features, and you just need to get an acceptable photo every now and then, for that kind of use, the Moto G Pure will at least be okay. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G80 processor. With the Moto G Pure, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25. Now on one hand, I will say neither phone here is particularly fast. These phones are really more meant for light, occasional use. But that being said, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A14 is still significantly faster. Honestly, in my experience, the Moto G Pure is a pretty slow phone. And sure, on one hand, if you're doing really basic activities like light web browsing, some social media here and there, and maybe streaming content like videos and music, for that kind of thing, the Moto G Pure will at least get the job done. But if you're going to be doing that same stuff, but you're just going to be on your phone a bit more in general, then in that case, you will get a better experience with the Samsung Galaxy A14. Now for the batteries, with the A14, this phone has a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15W fast charging, and with the Moto G Pure, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10W fast charging, which at that point isn't really even fast charging. But in general, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A14 does have the better battery in pretty much every way. With a 5000 mAh battery versus only 4000 with the Moto G Pure, the A14 is going to get much better battery life, and with 15W fast charging versus 10, I mean, it's not really that much of a difference, but if you do have a good fast charger, the A14 will charge a bit faster. So if the battery is important to you, definitely keep this in mind. Now for the software, with the A14, this phone does have Android 13, whereas with the Moto G Pure, this phone in my hand only has Android 11, but I have heard of Moto G Pures getting Android 12, so I feel like some of it really depends on the carrier. This phone is from AT&T prepaid, and I don't think I ever even actually put a SIM card in it. So just keep in mind, in general, if you get this phone like unlocked, for example, on Amazon, it should update to Android 12, but if you have certain carriers, they might not bother to give you the update. But in general, either way, Android 12 at this point is becoming more and more outdated as time goes on, especially compared to the A14 or really any Samsung Galaxy A series phone, because again, this phone does have Android 13, and with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get several other major updates in the future. I believe it will be getting Android 14, 15, 16, and 17, so compared to maybe getting Android 12 from Android 11, the Moto G Pure is definitely not nearly as good. That being said though, when it comes to devices like these, I feel like a lot of people really don't care that much about features like the software and things like that. So if you're really just looking for something basic for super light occasional use and you really just don't need that much from your phone, then perhaps you don't really care about the software anyway. And in that case, the Moto G Pure will at least be okay. As far as other features go, neither phone here has NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will want to get something completely different. But I do want to point out, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, I know they did this with the A13 last year, but some versions of this phone might have NFC. The one in my hand doesn't, but if you are curious about that feature, then definitely check the one you're buying before you actually get it, because the A14 is just one of those phones there's probably going to be multiple different versions for. So again, definitely keep this in mind. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A14 4G is better in pretty much every way. The A14 has a much better display, quite a bit more storage, a better camera, a faster processor, better software support, and a better battery too. That being said though, I feel like for what it is, considering at this point at least, you are going to have to get this phone factory unlocked, meaning it's pretty much going to be at full price. Whereas with the Moto G Pure, you can probably find this phone for close to free. When it comes to the actual value you're getting for the money, if you're getting something like the A14, I feel like this phone is going for around $160. So in that case, you might as well spend $30 more and get like the A14 5G, which is honestly better than this phone in almost every way. And if you're in the US, getting a phone through a US carrier, for the full price of this phone, you can get something that's honestly quite a bit higher end. And if you are really looking for a super basic entry-level device, chances are your needs are really not that complex, and in that case, most likely, you can get the Moto G Pure for quite a bit less, and for really light basic use for stuff like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music every now and then, and really just using your phone as a phone. While it's not the best device out there, the Moto G Pure will still at least get the job done, and if you can get it for like $20 versus $160 with the A14, I feel like at the end of the day, the Moto G Pure is probably a better deal. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 and the Motorola Moto G Pure. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.